Grab some popcorn and brace yourself for this bone-chilling tale from the depths of America's wilderness. My name's Mike, and I'm about to share an experience that will make you think twice about ever setting foot in a national park again. I captured footage of a Sasquatch attack that nearly cost me and my girlfriend our lives, and what happened afterward will make your blood run cold. Let me start by introducing myself properly. I'm a wildlife photographer. Or at least I was before all this happened. For the past 8 years, I've made my living capturing images of North America's most elusive creatures. Wolves in Yellowstone, mountain lions in the Rockies, bears in Alaska. You name it. I've probably spent weeks freezing my ass off trying to get the perfect shot of it. My work has been featured in National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and a bunch of other publications you've probably seen at the dentist's office. My girlfriend Amber is a wildlife biologist specializing in large predator behavior. We met 3 years ago at a conservation conference in Denver where I was showcasing my photography. She came up to my booth, pointed at a photo of a gray wolf I'd taken in Montana, and proceeded to tell me everything I'd gotten wrong about wolf behavior in my caption. I was simultaneously annoyed and fascinated. By the end of the conference, we'd exchanged numbers, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our relationship has always been built on a shared love of the wilderness. We spend most of our free time in national parks, often going weeks without seeing another human being. We've had our share of close calls, cornered by an angry moose in Grand Teton, nearly swept away by a flash flood in Zion, almost stepping on a rattlesnake in the Badlands. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared us for what happened at Olympic National Park last October. We had been planning the trip for months. Olympic is a photographer's dream. Nearly 1 million acres of pristine wilderness stretching, from snow-capped mountains to old-growth rainforests to wild coastline. I had an assignment to capture the park's Roosevelt elk during rutting season, and Amber had some time off from her research position at the university. The day before we left, we were packing up our gear in our small apartment in Seattle when Amber's phone buzzed with a text message. "Huh, that's weird," she said, frowning at her screen. "What's up?" I asked, trying to decide if I needed to bring my 600mm lens. It was heavy as hell, but perfect for wildlife that wouldn't let you get close. "It's from Dr. Nielsen," she replied, referring to her former doctoral advisor, a respected wildlife biologist who specialized in cryptozoology, the study of animals whose existence hasn't been proven. Most serious scientists considered it a fringe field, but Dr. Nielsen had credentials nobody could argue with. What does he want? I stuffed the massive lens into my pack, deciding the wait would be worth it. He wants to know if we can collect some hair samples while we're in Olympic. Says there have been some unusual reports from the Hoh rainforest area. Amber looked up from her phone, a mix of amusement and curiosity on her face. I groaned. "Please don't tell me he's got you chasing Bigfoot now. That guy might have a PhD, but he's spent too much time in the woods alone." Amber rolled her eyes. "Just because you can't photograph something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, Mike. Besides, all he's asking for is some hair samples if we come across anything unusual. No big deal." "Fine," I conceded. "But if we start finding giant footprints, I'm turning around and coming back to civilization." Little did I know how prophetic those words would turn out to be. We set out early the next morning, our Subaru Outback packed to the brim with camping gear, photography equipment, and enough trail mix to feed a small army. The drive from Seattle to Olympic National Park takes about 3 hours if the ferry lines aren't too bad. We spent the journey discussing where we wanted to set up our base camp. "I was thinking the Hoh rainforest," Amber said casually, not looking up from the map spread across her lap. I shot her a side glance. This wouldn't have anything to do with Dr. Nielsen's request, would it? She shrugged, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe. But it's also one of the best spots to find elk this time of year. 2 birds, 1 stone." I couldn't argue with her logic, even if I suspected her priorities might be a bit skewed. The Hoh rainforest is one of the largest temperate rainforests in the U.S., and in October, it's a prime location for wildlife activity before the harsh winter sets in. As we drove through Port Angeles and deeper into the Olympic Peninsula, the landscape gradually transformed. The suburban sprawl gave way to dense forests of towering Douglas firs and hemlocks, their branches draped with hanging moss that swayed in the gentle breeze. The air grew thicker, moister, carrying the rich scent of decay and rebirth that characterizes old-growth forests. We reached the park entrance around noon and showed our annual pass to the ranger, a tall, bearded guy with the weathered look of someone who's spent most of his life outdoors. "Heading to the Hoh?" he asked, glancing at all our gear. "That's the plan," I replied. "Looking for Roosevelt elk." The ranger nodded thoughtfully. "You might want to be careful out there. We've had some strange reports from hikers in that area over the past few weeks." My stomach tightened. Strange how? Wildlife acting unusually aggressive. A couple of hikers said they felt like they were being watched. Probably nothing to worry about. Could be a mountain lion staking out territory, or maybe a bear that hasn't gone into hibernation yet. Just keep your wits about you. "Will do," I assured him, trying to ignore the excited look Amber was failing to hide. As we pulled away from the entrance station, Amber turned to me with raised eyebrows. "Unusual wildlife activity? Being watched? Sounds exactly like what Dr. Nielsen was talking about. Or it sounds like a perfectly normal predator that the average hiker isn't used to encountering," I countered, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of unease. Rangers don't typically warn visitors unless there's legitimate cause for concern. We drove another hour to reach the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center. From there, we planned to hike about 5 miles in before setting up our base camp. It would give us good access to the areas I wanted to photograph while keeping us far enough from the typical tourist trails. As we shouldered our packs, mine, significantly heavier with all my camera gear, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. October was past the peak tourist season, but even so, there were usually a few other hikers around. Today, the parking lot held only 2 other vehicles, and there wasn't another person in sight. "It's like we have the whole place to ourselves," Amber said, adjusting her pack straps. "Yeah," I agreed, though something about the emptiness felt off. "Let's get moving before it starts getting dark." The trail into the Hoh Rainforest is like stepping into another world. The canopy above is so dense that only dappled sunlight makes it through, creating an ethereal, green-tinted atmosphere. The forest floor is a carpet of ferns and moss, with nurse logs, fallen trees that provide nutrients for new growth, creating a chaotic but beautiful obstacle course. It's like walking through a real-life fairy tale, equal parts enchanting and slightly menacing. We hiked in comfortable silence for the most part, occasionally pointing out interesting fungi or bird calls to each other. About 3 miles in, we stopped for a water break beside a small stream. As I was taking a swig from my bottle, Amber suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on something across the water. "Mike," she whispered. "Look." I followed her gaze and saw it immediately. A set of tracks in the soft mud on the far bank. Even from a distance, I could tell they were big, much bigger than any human footprint should be. "Probably just a bear," I said, but without much conviction. The shape was all wrong for a bear. Amber was already crossing the shallow stream, her hiking boots splashing through the clear water. I followed reluctantly, my camera instinctively in hand. The tracks were enormous, easily 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. They were clearly foot-shaped, with 5 distinct toe impressions at the front. The stride length, measuring from one print to the next, was over 4 feet. "That's not a bear," Amber said, her voice a mix of scientific curiosity and barely contained excitement. She knelt down beside one of the prints, careful not to disturb it, and placed her own hand beside it for scale. Her entire hand fit comfortably within just the heel portion of the print. I snapped a few photos, trying to include objects for scale. Could be a hoax, I suggested, though the location made that seem unlikely. We're pretty far from any trail. Would be a hell of a lot of effort to come out here just to fake some footprints. Amber was already taking out sample collection materials from her pack. Small plastic bags, tweezers, a notepad to record the location. Look at the depth of the impression, she said, pointing to how the mud was pushed down. Whatever made this print was heavy, several 100 pounds at least. As she worked, I found myself scanning the surrounding forest, suddenly very aware of the dense vegetation that surrounded us on all sides. Perfect cover for something that didn't want to be seen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Let's not stick around too long, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. We still have a couple miles to go before we reach the camping area. Amber nodded, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave the discovery. She collected a few hairs. She found snagged on a nearby branch, carefully placing them in a sample bag before labeling it with our GPS coordinates. Back on the trail, the forest seemed different somehow. Darker, closer, more watchful. I found myself jumping at small sounds. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Amber noticed my unease. "You're not actually scared, are you?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "The big, brave wildlife. Photographer afraid of Bigfoot?" "I'm not afraid of Bigfoot," I retorted. "I'm sensibly cautious about any large animal that might view us as either a threat or a meal." Amber laughed. Sasquatches are believed to be omnivores with a diet similar to bears, primarily plant-based but opportunistically carnivorous. There's no documented case of one actually attacking humans. There's no documented anything about them because they don't exist, I said. But my heart wasn't in the argument anymore. Those footprints had been real, made by something large and heavy that walked on 2 feet. I just wasn't ready to jump to cryptozoological conclusions. We reached our planned camping area about an hour before sunset. It was a small clearing beside the Hoh River, not an official campsite, but a spot Amber and I had used before. The sound of the rushing water would mask any noises we made, which was ideal for not scaring away wildlife. Now, though, that same feature suddenly seemed less desirable. As we set up our tent, I couldn't stop glancing into the surrounding forest. The feeling of being observed had only intensified, and I found myself rushing through our normal camp setup routine. "You're jumpy as hell," Amber observed as we finished securing the rainfly. "Those footprints really got to you, huh?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know what made those prints, but something big is out there. And call me crazy, but I swear it's watching us." Amber's expression softened. She placed a hand on my arm. "Hey, this is your element, remember? You've camped in grizzly country, wolf territory, mountain lion habitats. Whatever's out there, it's just another animal." "Yeah, you're right," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "Let's get some food and turn in early. I want to be up before dawn to catch the elk in the morning light." We cooked a simple meal of dehydrated stroganoff on our camp stove, the familiar routine helping to ease my nerves. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the constant background music of the river. We were washing our dishes with biodegradable soap when we heard it, a long, low howl that echoed through the trees. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before, not a wolf or a coyote or even the scream of a mountain lion. It started deep and guttural, then rose in pitch to something almost human-like before fading away. Amber and I locked eyes, both frozen in place. "That was," she began. "Probably just a wolf," I cut her off, not wanting to acknowledge the alternative. "Mike, you know damn well that wasn't a wolf," she said quietly. That sounded exactly like what witnesses describe as a Sasquatch vocalization. Before I could respond, another howl answered the first, this one from the opposite direction. Then another, and another, until it seemed like we were surrounded by the eerie calls. They're communicating, Amber whispered, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. This is incredible. This is how horror movies start, I muttered, reaching for my largest flashlight and switching it on. The powerful beam cut through the darkness but illuminated only trees and undergrowth. We should get in the tent. As if on cue, a massive crack echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a large branch breaking. It came from alarmingly close, maybe 100 yards from our camp. Inside now, I said, grabbing Amber's arm and pulling her toward the tent. For once, she didn't argue. We zipped ourselves inside our nylon shelter, which suddenly seemed absurdly fragile. What protection would it offer against something large enough to leave those footprints? Should we pack up and leave? I whispered, though I wasn't sure if hiking through the forest at night was any safer than staying put. Amber shook her head. No, that's the worst thing we could do. If there are Sasquatches out there, they're probably just curious. Running might trigger a predatory response. Great, I muttered. So we just sit here and hope they don't get too curious, pretty much, she replied, her voice calm despite the circumstances. This is an incredible scientific opportunity, Mike. No one has ever documented an encounter like this. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you serious right now? We're potentially surrounded by unknown creatures that could tear this tent open? Like tissue paper, and you're thinking about documentation? She had the decency to look slightly abashed. Force of habit. But seriously, we should record this. She reached for her phone. I'm going to start an audio recording at least. As she set up her phone to record, I dug through my pack for my camera. If something was going to rip our tent open, I was at least going to get a photo of it. I removed the wide-angle lens I'd been using for landscape shots and attached my fastest lens, a 70-200mm f2.8 that could gather enough light for night photography if necessary. Outside, the forest had gone unnervingly silent. The night creatures that had been providing ambient noise had all gone quiet, as if holding their breath. Even the consistent rush of the river seemed somehow muted. They're still out there, Amber whispered, watching us. As if in response to her words, something large moved past our tent. We couldn't see it, but we could feel the displacement of air, hear the soft footfalls on the forest floor, sense the presence of something massive just inches away on the other side of the nylon. My hand tightened around my camera and I found myself holding my breath. Beside me, Amber was absolutely still, her eyes wide in the dim light of our lantern. A deep, rumbling sound emanated from just outside the tent. Not quite a growl, but something like a very deep, very quiet humming. It was so low-pitched that I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity. Then, slowly, deliberately, something pressed against the side of our tent. The nylon wall bulged inward, taking the shape of what could only be a massive hand or paw. 5 distinct protrusions, fingers or toes, created individual depressions in the fabric. Amber gasped softly. I raised my camera, hands shaking, and managed to take a photo. The flash fired automatically in the low light, illuminating the massive silhouette from within our tent. In an instant, chaos erupted. A deafening roar shook the air around us, and the tent wall was violently pulled away. As the creature recoiled from the sudden light, we heard powerful footsteps crashing away through the underbrush, accompanied by more of those haunting howls, now clearly signaling alarm. Oh my God, Amber breathed, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. Did you get that on camera? I nodded, my hands still shaking as I looked at the digital display. The image was blurry but unmistakable. The silhouette of an enormous hand, at least twice the size of a human's, with 5 distinct fingers. We need to leave, I said firmly, already starting to pack up my gear. First light, we're out of here. Amber looked torn. But Mike, this is unprecedented. No one has ever documented this kind of close encounter before. We can't just leave. Watch me, I replied, stuffing my spare clothes back into my backpack. That thing was inches away from us, Amber. What do you think would have happened if it had decided to really investigate? That flash pissed it off, but it could come back. She bit her lip, clearly conflicted. Fine, she finally conceded. But we're taking the long way back and setting up camera traps before we go. I'm not leaving without attempting to gather more evidence. I wanted to argue, but knew it was pointless. Once Amber set her mind on something, especially something scientific, there was no changing it. And a small, professional part of me, the wildlife photographer who'd spent years trying to capture images of elusive creatures, couldn't help but be intrigued by the possibility of photographing something no one ever had before. Fine, I agreed reluctantly. We'll set up the camera traps at first light, but then we're heading back to the visitor center and we're staying on the main trails. Amber smiled, knowing she'd won. Deal. Neither of us slept much that night. We lay side by side in our sleeping bags, listening to the forest sounds slowly return as the hours passed. Occasionally, we'd hear another distant howl, but nothing came close to our camp again. As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we emerged from our tent, bleary-eyed but alert. The forest looked peaceful in the early morning mist, giving no indication of the terrifying encounter just hours before. Look, Amber said, pointing to the ground near where the creature had stood. There, pressed into the soft forest floor, was another footprint, identical to those we'd seen by the stream. But this one was just feet from our tent, exactly where the creature had been standing. I felt a chill run down my spine as I photographed the print from multiple angles. There was no denying it now. Something huge had visited us in the night, something that walked on two legs and had hands eerily similar to our own, just much, much larger. Let's get those camera traps set up, I said, unable to keep the tension from my voice. I want to be on the trail within the hour. We worked quickly, setting up 3 motion-activated trail cameras in a rough triangle around our campsite. Each was carefully positioned to capture anything large moving through the area, and each was secured high enough on a tree trunk that a curious animal couldn't easily dislodge it. As Amber was setting up the last camera, I wandered a short distance, away to fill our water bottles from the river. I was kneeling by the water's edge when I noticed something strange on the opposite bank, a large pile of branches and forest debris that looked deliberately arranged. Amber, I called, keeping my voice low. You might want to see this. She joined me by the river, following my pointing finger to the structure across the water. A stick structure, she breathed, excitement evident in her voice, just like the ones reported in other Sasquatch sightings. The formation was about 6 feet tall and roughly conical, with large branches leaned together to form a kind of crude shelter or marker. It was clearly not a natural formation. The branches had been broken, not fallen, and placed with apparent purpose. Could be made by humans, I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. We were miles from any maintained trail, and the structure served no practical purpose for hikers or campers. We need to check it out, Amber said, already looking. For a shallow place to cross the river. Amber, no, I protested. We agreed to set up the cameras and then leave. She shot me a look that was half apologetic, half determined. This is too important, Mike. It will only take a few minutes. You can stay here if you want. Knowing there was no way I was letting her go alone, I sighed in defeat and followed her across the river at a spot where some exposed rocks created a natural crossing. The water was numbingly cold, soaking through our hiking boots, but we made it across without incident. The stick structure was even more impressive up close. Some of the branches used in its construction were thick as my arm and would have required considerable strength to break and position. Around its base, the ground had been cleared of debris in an almost perfect circle about 10 feet in diameter. Amber was in full scientific mode now, taking photos, measurements, and samples. I kept watch, camera in hand, constantly scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. There's hair caught in the branches. Amber announced, carefully extracting several long, dark strands with her tweezers. And look at this. She pointed to a section of one of the larger branches. The bark had been worn smooth, as if something had repeatedly gripped it in the same spot. When I looked closer, I could make out what appeared to be dermal ridges, the equivalent of fingerprints, impressed into the smoothed area. Something with hands did this, I said quietly. Something strong enough to snap these branches like twigs. Amber nodded, her expression a mixture of fascination and unease. She never finished her sentence. From somewhere in the forest behind us came a sound that made my blood run cold. A deep, guttural grunt, followed by the distinct crack of underbrush being crushed underfoot. Something was moving toward us, and it was moving fast. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Amber's arm. We bolted for the river crossing, but we'd only made it halfway across when I heard a splash behind us. I turned, camera instinctively raised, and captured the image that would soon shock the world. Standing knee-deep in the river, not 30 yards behind us, was a creature straight out of legend. It stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark hair with a massive barrel chest and powerful limbs. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and ape features, a prominent brow ridge, deep-set eyes that glinted with intelligence, a wide nose, and a mouth set in what looked like an angry snarl. For one frozen moment, we stared at each other, Amber and I rooted in place by shock and terror, the creature seemingly surprised by our sudden flight. Then it let out a roar that seemed to shake the very air and charged toward us. My survival instincts finally kicked in. I grabbed Amber, who was fumbling with her sample bag, and pulled her toward the shore. "Go! Now!" We scrambled up the riverbank and tore through the forest, heading roughly in the direction of our campsite, but too panicked to navigate carefully. Behind us, we could hear the creature splashing through the river, then the heavy thud of its footsteps on solid ground. It was following us, and from the sound of it, gaining quickly. "The camera!" Amber gasped as we ran. "Did you get a photo?" Even in mortal danger, her scientific mind was focused on documentation. "Yes," I panted. "But it won't matter if we're dead." We burst into our campsite, but I knew we couldn't stop. The creature was too close, and our tent offered no protection. I grabbed my backpack with my camera gear. I wasn't leaving that behind, and Amber snatched her sample bag. Everything else would have to be abandoned. "This way!" I shouted, veering onto the trail that would lead us back toward the visitor center. It was narrow and winding, but at least it was a defined path, and there was a chance we might encounter other hikers. We'd only made it about 100 yards down the trail when a second creature stepped out from behind a massive tree directly in our path. This one was slightly smaller than the first, but still towered over us. It made a series of clicking sounds, followed by that same deep rumbling vocalization we'd heard outside our tent. From behind us came an answering call. The first creature was still in pursuit. "They're coordinating," Amber whispered, her voice a mix of terror and academic interest. "Hunting us like wolves." We were trapped between them. The trail was too narrow to go around, and the undergrowth on either side was too dense to push through quickly. The second creature took a step toward us, arms outstretched in what could have been either a threatening gesture or an attempt to block our escape. In desperation, I reached for the bear spray attached to my belt. It was meant for grizzlies, and I had no idea if it would work on whatever these creatures were, but it was our only defense. When I spray, "Run past it," I whispered to Amber. "Don't look back, don't stop, just run." She nodded, tensed to sprint. The creature took another step toward us, now close enough that I could smell it. A powerful, musky odor, unlike anything I'd encountered before. I raised the bear spray, aimed, and pressed down hard on the trigger. A cloud of capsaicin spray erupted from the canister, catching the creature full in the face. The effect was immediate and dramatic. It reared back with a howl of pain, massive hands clawing at its eyes and face. I grabbed Amber's hand, and we charged past it while it was disoriented. It worked, Amber gasped as we sprinted down the trail. I can't believe that worked. Behind us, the creature's howls of pain had transformed into roars of rage. Answering. Calls echoed through the forest, not just from the one that had been pursuing us, but from multiple directions. There were more of them out there, a lot more. We ran like we'd never run before, fueled by pure adrenaline. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the sound of pursuit drove us forward. The creatures were following, crashing through the forest parallel to the trail, occasionally visible through gaps in the trees. They're hurting us, Amber panted as we ran, driving us somewhere. She was right. I could see how they were positioned to keep us on the trail, moving in a specific direction. But we had no choice but to keep going forward, attempting to break. Through their line would only bring us into direct contact with them. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes of terror-fueled running, the trail opened onto a broader path. We'd reached one of the main hiking routes that led back to the visitor center. Surely there would be other people here, witnesses, safety in numbers. But the trail was deserted. It was still early, and the park wasn't busy this time of year. We were on our own. We can't keep running, Amber gasped, bent over with her hands on her knees. They'll outlast us. She was right. We were both in good shape, but we were carrying gear, running on little sleep and high stress. The creatures, moving with an easy ground-eating lope through their home territory, showed no signs of tiring. The ranger station, I said, trying to recall the trail map in my mind. There's a backcountry ranger station about a mile ahead. It might not be staffed, but it will have a radio. Amber nodded, and we set off again, moving as fast as we could while trying to conserve energy. The sounds of pursuit had faded somewhat. The creatures were hanging back, watching, waiting. It was almost more terrifying than having them right on our heels. When we finally spotted the small wooden building that served as the backcountry ranger station, I nearly collapsed with relief. We staggered the last 100 yards and practically fell against the door. It was locked. No, 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 I groaned, rattling the handle futilely. There has to be a way in. Amber was already circling the building, looking for another entrance or a hidden key. Here, she called. There's a window unlatched in the back. I rushed to join her. The window was small but just big enough for us to squeeze through. I gave Amber a boost and she wriggled inside, then helped pull me through after her. The interior of the station was basic but exactly what we needed. A desk with a radio, some emergency supplies, a first aid kit, and most importantly, a solid door with a deadbolt. I locked it immediately, then went to check that all the windows were secured. Amber headed straight for the radio. Hello? Hello? This is Dr. Amber Chen at the Elk Creek Ranger Station. We have an emergency situation. Can anyone hear me? Static. Crackled from the speaker, then a voice responded, This is Olympic National Park headquarters. What's your emergency, over? Amber looked at me, momentary relief in her eyes, then turned back to the radio. We've been attacked by multiple large, unidentified creatures in the Hoh rainforest. We're currently barricaded in the ranger station, but we need immediate evacuation. Over. There was a pause, longer than seemed appropriate, before the voice responded. Did you say unidentified creatures? Can you be more specific about what attacked you? Over. Amber hesitated, looking at me again. We both knew how it would sound. You have to tell them, I said, joining her at the radio. We have photographic evidence. She nodded and pressed the transmit button again. This is going to sound unbelievable, but we were attacked by what appear to be Sasquatch-like creatures. Multiple individuals, at least 8 feet tall, bipedal, covered in dark hair. They displayed coordinated hunting behavior and seem highly intelligent. We have photographic evidence and biological samples. Over. This time, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Finally, the radio crackled to life again. Dr. Chen, please stay where you are. We're sending a rescue team immediately. Do not attempt to leave the ranger station. I repeat, do not leave the ranger station. Over. Copy that, Amber replied. We'll stay put. Please hurry. Over and out. She set down the radio handset and looked at me, a mix of emotions playing across her face. They're coming, she said, but her tone was uncertain. I nodded, moving to the small window to scan the surrounding forest. Something felt off about that exchange. I noticed that too, Amber agreed. They didn't seem surprised or skeptical. Before we could discuss it further, a heavy thud against the door made us both jump. Something large was pressing against it, testing its strength. The door held, but a fine shower of dust fell from the frame, suggesting it wouldn't withstand a determined assault. They found us, I whispered, backing away from the door. And I don't think they're going to wait for the rescue team. Another thud, harder this time. The door frame creaked ominously. From outside came a chorus of those haunting, howling vocalizations, a sound I now recognized as a call to action. They were summoning the rest of their group. Amber joined me at the window, her face pale but determined. How long until help arrives? Checked my watch. The visitor center is at least 30 minutes away by vehicle, assuming they leave immediately. The door shuddered under another powerful blow. A crack appeared in one of the panels. We don't have 30 minutes, Amber said quietly. I raised my camera, making sure it was ready to capture whatever came through that door. If these were going to be our last moments, at least we would leave behind evidence of what happened to us. The attack on the door suddenly ceased. The forest outside had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, nothing but an eerie, expectant hush. Amber and I exchanged confused glances. Had they given up? It seemed unlikely after they'd tracked us so persistently. Then we heard it, a new sound coming from the roof of the station. Heavy footsteps moving across the wooden shingles, followed by a scratching, tearing noise. They're trying to get in through the roof, I realized with growing horror. A section of ceiling began to splinter and crack. Long, powerful fingers appeared through the breaking wood, tearing away chunks of the roof like it was made of cardboard. Amber grabbed my arm, her grip painfully tight. Mike, she whispered. If we don't make it. I turned to her, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also the resolve. We're going to make it, I promised, though I had no idea how. The creature above us let out a triumphant roar as it created an opening large enough to reach through. A massive, hair-covered arm plunged into the station, grasping blindly. I raised my camera and started shooting, the rapid-fire click of the shutter capturing frame after frame of the massive arm reaching down through our ceiling. The creature's hand was easily twice the size of a human's, with thick fingers tipped by dark, curved nails that looked powerful enough to disembowel a bear. The closet! Amber shouted, pointing to a small storage area at the back of the station. We rushed inside, pulling the door shut just as the creature tore away enough of the roof to stick its head through the opening. Through the slats in the closet door, I kept shooting, capturing an image that would later become the most scrutinized photo in cryptozoology history, a clear view of a Sasquatch face. The creature's features were a disturbing blend of human and ape, with a heavy brow ridge shadowing deep-set eyes that glinted with unmistakable intelligence. Its wide nose flared as it sniffed the air, and its mouth, lined with surprisingly human-like teeth, opened in what could only be described as a snarl. It can smell us, Amber whispered, clutching her sample bag to her chest. They have incredible olfactory capabilities, according to witness reports. Not helping, I muttered, though I couldn't tear my eyes away from the viewfinder. The part of me that was a wildlife photographer, the professional who had spent years trying to capture perfect shots of elusive creatures, couldn't believe my luck. The rest of me was frozen in primordial terror. The creature let out another roar and began tearing at the roof with renewed vigor, creating an opening large enough for its massive shoulders to fit through. It was going to get in, and soon. "The radio," Amber gasped. "We need to tell them to hurry." But the radio was on the desk, and between us and it was nearly 400 pounds of angry Sasquatch. We were trapped in the closet with no way out. Just then, the creature's head snapped up. Attention suddenly focused on something outside. It made a series of rapid, clicking vocalizations that reminded me of the way dolphins communicate. From somewhere in the forest came an answering call, followed by another and another. Different pitches, different patterns, but unmistakably, the same language. The creature withdrew from the hole in the roof with surprising speed, and we heard its heavy footsteps as it leapt to the ground. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of it loping back into the forest, joined by at least 3 others. Dark, massive figures moving with an agility that belied their size. "What just happened?" I asked, daring to push the closet door open. A crack. Amber shook her head, looking as confused as I felt. "I don't know. It's like they were called away." We cautiously emerged from our hiding place. The ranger station was a mess. Chunks of the roof scattered across the floor, claw marks, gouged into the wooden beams. But we were alive, and for the moment, the creatures were gone. I went to the window, carefully peering out at the surrounding forest. "I don't see them, but that doesn't mean they're not out there." Amber had already grabbed the radio. Olympic. National Park Headquarters, this is Dr. Chen at Elk Creek Station. The situation has escalated. The creatures have partially destroyed the roof of the station but have temporarily retreated. Please advise on status of rescue team. Over. The response was immediate this time. Dr. Chen, rescue team is en route. ETA 15 minutes. Stay inside and continue to shelter in place. Over. Copy that, Amber replied. Be advised that there are multiple individuals, and they appear to be coordinating their actions. Our current situation may only be a temporary reprieve. Over. Understood. Rescue team is prepared for the situation. Over and out. Amber set down the handset, her brow furrowed. That was weird, right? They didn't ask any questions about the attack or express any disbelief. It's like they already know about these things, I finished for her. The thought was unsettling. If park authorities were aware of giant, potentially dangerous creatures living in the forest, why weren't there warnings? Why was the area open to hikers at all? Before we could discuss it further, a new sound caught our attention. Not the distant thrum of helicopter rotors as we expected, but something much more alarming. A deep, resonant drumming that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath our feet. "What is that?" I whispered, instinctively moving closer to Amber. She shook her head, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "I've never heard anything like it. It's almost like a heartbeat." The drumming grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't mechanical. It had an organic quality, a rhythm that felt ancient and purposeful, and it was coming from all around us. They're communicating, Amber realized, her eyes wide. This is some kind of long-distance signaling. I raised my camera again, this time switching to video mode. Whatever was happening, I needed to document it. "Do you think they're calling for reinforcements?" Before Amber could respond, the drumming abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying than the strange sound had been. Then we heard it, a low, melodic vocalization coming from just outside the ranger station. It wasn't a howl or a roar like before. This was different, almost like singing. Amber moved toward the window, drawn by scientific curiosity despite the danger. I followed, camera still recording. What we saw defied all logic and expectation. Standing in a semicircle around the ranger station were at least a dozen Sasquatches, ranging in size from the giants we'd encountered earlier to smaller individuals that might have been juveniles. But it wasn't their number that struck me. It was what they were doing. Each held what appeared to be a crude instrument. Hollow logs, stretches of bark, even what looked like bones, and they were creating music. The largest one, the same creature that had torn through our roof, stood at the center of the group. It held no instrument, but instead was the source of the haunting vocalization we'd heard. "This isn't hunting behavior," Amber whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is cultural, ritualistic." As we watched, transfixed, the creatures began to move in unison, a slow, swaying dance that seemed to follow the rhythm of their music. The leader's voice rose and fell in what could only be described as a melody, complex and beautiful in its alien way. "They're not trying to attack us," I realized aloud. "At least, not anymore. This is something else." Amber nodded slowly. I think they're trying to communicate with us." The drumming resumed, this time incorporated into their strange symphony. The leader stopped singing and instead made a series of gestures toward the ranger station, toward us. It pointed to its eyes, then to us, then made a sweeping motion with its massive hand. "It wants us to come out," Amber said, her voice barely audible. "It's inviting us to watch? Observe? Or it's telling us to leave," I countered, still not convinced of their peaceful intentions. "Maybe this is a warning." The leader made the gestures again, more emphatically this time. Then, in a move that left us both speechless, it slowly placed its instruments on the ground and raised its empty hands, palms outward. "That's a universal sign of peace," Amber breathed. "It's showing it's unarmed." I lowered my camera, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about wildlife, about cryptid legends, about the world itself, seemed to be crumbling around me. These weren't mindless beasts. They weren't even simply intelligent animals. What we were witnessing suggested a level of cultural and social development that approached human complexity. "What do we do?" I asked, suddenly feeling out of my depth. "The rescue team will be here soon. If they come in guns blazing..." Amber's face hardened with resolve. "We have to stop them. Whatever these creatures are, they're trying to communicate, not harm us. At least, not anymore." She returned to the radio, but before she could transmit, the device crackled to life. "Dr. Chen, this is Captain Reynolds with the Olympic National Park Special Response Unit. We're approaching your position from the south. Please confirm your status." "Over." Amber pressed the transmit button. "Captain Reynolds, our status has changed. The creatures have initiated what appears to be a non-aggressive contact ritual. They're displaying signs of advanced communication and cultural behavior. Please approach with extreme caution and no visible weapons. Over." There was a long pause before the response came. "Dr. Chen, please repeat your last transmission. Did you say non-aggressive contact ritual?" Over. "Affirmative," Amber replied, her voice steady despite the extraordinary nature of what she was reporting. "These beings are demonstrating complex social behavior, including instrumental music and coordinated movement. They appear to be attempting peaceful communication. I strongly advise against any aggressive approach." Over. Another pause, longer this time. "Understood, Dr. Chen. We're adjusting our approach accordingly. Please continue to shelter in place and maintain observation. Over." Amber set down the handset, her expression a mix of relief and determination. Let's hope they actually listen. Outside, the strange concert continued, the haunting melody rising and falling as the creatures moved in their slow, rhythmic dance. I resumed filming, knowing that what we were capturing would forever change how humanity understood these legendary beings, if the footage ever saw the light of day. "Look," Amber whispered, pointing to the edge of the clearing where a new figure had emerged from the forest. This Sasquatch was different from the others, smaller, with silver-gray hair rather than the dark brown of the rest. It moved with a slight limp, suggesting advanced age. In its hands, it carried something that made my breath catch in my throat. A worn, weathered backpack that was unmistakably human in origin. The leader stopped its singing to acknowledge the elder, and the music gradually quieted. The silver-haired Sasquatch approached the ranger station slowly, deliberately, the backpack, held out before it like an offering. "I think it wants us to come out," Amber said. I nodded, my mind made up. "Then let's go. Together." We moved to the door, my camera still recording, Amber clutching her sample bag. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, and we stepped outside. The assembled creatures went completely still, their strange music silenced. All eyes were on us. Large, intelligent eyes that reflected a range of emotions I wouldn't have thought possible in non-human faces. Curiosity, caution, and something that looked remarkably like hope. The elder Sasquatch approached us, still holding out the backpack. Now that we were closer, I could see that it was old and faded, the once bright blue fabric now weathered to a pale ghost of its former color. There was a patch on the front, a National Park Service emblem from at least a decade ago. The elder placed the backpack on the ground between us, then stepped back, making the same palms-out gesture the leader had used earlier. Amber moved forward first, kneeling to examine the offering. With careful hands, she unzipped the main compartment and reached inside, pulling out a dusty, leather-bound journal. "Oh my God," she whispered, opening the cover. "Mike, look at this." I knelt beside her, camera temporarily forgotten as I took in what she was showing me. The journal contained meticulous notes, detailed sketches, and what appeared to be attempts at transcribing the very vocalizations we'd been hearing. The first entry was dated October 12, 1997, nearly 20 years ago. "Dr. Robert Nielsen," Amber read from the flyleaf, her voice filled with wonder. "Mike, this is my advisor's journal. The one who asked us to collect samples. He was here studying them 2 decades ago." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Nielsen hadn't been sending us on a wild goose chase or indulging a fringe fascination with cryptids. He'd known exactly what we would find, because he'd found it himself years earlier. I looked up at the elder Sasquatch, seeing it now with new eyes. They knew him. They recognized Amber's connection to him somehow. Amber nodded, turning pages rapidly. "His notes. He spent months here, documenting their behavior, learning their communication patterns. He describes exactly what we've been experiencing, their territorial defense, their communication methods, even this musical ritual." She looked up, eyes shining with the excitement of scientific discovery. "He calls it the peace offering ceremony. It's only performed when they've decided to initiate contact, rather than drive intruders away." The elder Sasquatch made a soft hooting sound, drawing our attention back to it. Slowly, deliberately, it reached out one massive hand, not toward us but toward Amber's sample bag. "I think it wants to see what you collected," I said. Amber hesitated only briefly before opening her bag and carefully removing the hair samples and small container of soil from near the footprints. She held them out, palms up, mimicking the Sasquatch's earlier gesture. The elder examined the samples without touching them, then made a series of clicking sounds toward the leader. The leader responded with its own vocalizations, and suddenly, the entire group resumed their musical performance, this time with increased tempo and volume. "I think we've passed some kind of test," Amber said, her voice barely audible over the strange concert. Just then, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the Sasquatch symphony. The creatures immediately fell silent, heads turning in unison, toward the source of the mechanical intrusion. "The rescue team," I said. "We need to make sure they understand what's happening here." But before we could move, the elder Sasquatch made a sweeping gesture with one arm. The entire group began to back away toward the forest, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The leader was the last to retreat, fixing us with one final penetrating gaze before disappearing into the trees. Within moments, the clearing was empty save for Amber and me, standing bewildered outside the damaged ranger station with Dr. Nielsen's journal and our collected samples. "They're gone," Amber said, a note of loss in her voice. "Just like that." "But they left us this," I replied, indicating the journal. "And we have the footage, the photographs, the samples, evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away." The sound of vehicles grew louder, and soon 2 rugged SUVs with National Park Service markings pulled into the clearing. Men and women in tactical gear poured out, weapons ready but not aimed, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. As they took in the scene, the damaged ranger station, the strange patterns pressed into the earth where the Sasquatches had performed their ritual, and the 2 of us standing calmly in the midst of it all. A tall woman with short gray hair approached us, her uniform marking her as the highest-ranking officer present. "Dr. Chen? Mr. Reynolds? I'm Captain Reynolds. Are you injured?" "We're fine," Amber replied, still clutching the journal to her chest. "The beings have retreated peacefully into the forest." Captain Reynolds surveyed the scene, her expression unreadable. "I've been working in these parks for 20 years and I've never—" She trailed off, then seemed to collect herself. "We need to get you both to safety and debrief you on what happened here." "We have extensive documentation," I said, holding up my camera. "Photos, video, physical samples, and now this journal. From a previous researcher who encountered the same group of creatures." I paused, studying her reaction. "But something tells me this isn't the first time the Park Service has dealt with these beings." Captain Reynolds' expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's discuss this somewhere more secure. My team will need to assess the damage to the station and sweep the area." As we were led to one of the SUVs, Amber whispered to me, "They know. They've always known." I nodded slightly, making sure my memory cards were securely in my pocket rather than in my camera. Whatever happened next, I was determined that our evidence wouldn't disappear into some government archive. The drive back to the visitor center was tense and largely silent. Captain Reynolds made several calls on a secure radio, using terminology that seemed deliberately obscure. I caught phrases like Code Sigma confirmed and Level 4 containment protocols, none of which sounded like standard park ranger procedure. When we arrived, instead of entering through the main doors, we were led to a service entrance at the rear of the building. Beyond it lay not the typical administrative offices one might expect, but a sophisticated command center humming with activity. Screens displayed satellite imagery of the Olympic Peninsula, with certain areas marked in red. Communications operators sat at workstations, coordinating what sounded like multiple field teams. "Welcome to the Olympic National Park Special Research Division," Captain Reynolds said, watching our reactions carefully. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." What followed was a debriefing that lasted well into the night. We learned that the National Park Service, in conjunction with other government agencies, had been monitoring and studying the Olympic Peninsula Sasquatch population for over 50 years. They weren't cover-up conspirators as I'd initially feared, but rather conservationists of the highest order, dedicated to protecting an intelligent endangered species from both human interference and its own occasional aggression. Dr. Nielsen was one of our most valuable researchers, explained Dr. Marcus Patel, the division's lead scientist. He pioneered our understanding of their communication systems and was the first to document their musical traditions. When he fell ill 5 years ago, his work was left unfinished. That's why he sent us there, Amber realized. He knew I'd approach it with scientific rigor rather than sensationalism. Dr. Patel nodded. He spoke highly of your methodical approach and ethical standards. He believed you might be ready to continue his work. And what about me? I asked. Was I just collateral damage in this recruitment plan? Captain Reynolds shook her head. Your skills as a wildlife photographer made you a valuable addition. The images you captured today are the clearest documentation we've ever obtained. Most of our researchers aren't trained in photography, and these beings are notoriously difficult to photograph clearly. I felt a surge of professional pride despite the circumstances. So what happens now? Are you going to confiscate our evidence? Swear us to secrecy? Make us disappear? Dr. Patel and Captain Reynolds exchanged glances. Actually, Dr. Patel said carefully, we were hoping to offer you both positions with our research team. Amber's eyes widened. You want us to study them? Officially? You've already established a connection, Captain Reynolds pointed out. The elder recognized your association with Dr. Nielsen and initiated the peace offering ceremony. That's exceedingly rare. What about the footage? I asked, unwilling to simply hand over what could be the most significant wildlife documentation in history. The photographs? We're not asking you to surrender them, Dr. Patel assured me. But we do ask that any release be coordinated with our team with appropriate context and protections for the subjects. It was a surreal conversation, discussing publication rights and research methodologies for creatures most of the world still considered mythical. Yet there was something profoundly right about it, too. These weren't monsters to be feared or trophies to be hunted. They were intelligent beings with their own culture, their own music, their own way of life, deserving of study, yes, but also of respect and protection. Amber and I exchanged a long look, an entire conversation passing between us without words. Finally, she turned back to Dr. Patel and Captain Reynolds. We accept your offer, she said, but on one condition. And that is? Captain Reynolds asked. We want to lead an expedition back to the contact site, I said, picking up Amber's thought. Not to capture or disturb them, but to attempt communication on their terms. With Dr. Nielsen's journal, we might be able to understand more of their language, their intentions. Dr. Patel looked thoughtful. It's risky. They might perceive a return so soon as another invasion of their territory. Or they might see it as a response to their invitation, Amber countered. The elder specifically showed us Dr. Nielsen's work. I believe they want us to continue it. After much discussion and planning, our proposal was approved. 3 days later, we returned to the site of our encounter, this time as part of an official research team rather than terrified survivors. We brought no weapons, only scientific equipment, recording devices, and offerings of fruit and honey, items Dr. Nielsen's journal suggested the Sasquatch particularly valued. For 2 days, we camped near the damaged ranger station, documenting the area and leaving our offerings at the edge of the clearing. On the morning of the 3rd day, we woke to find the offerings gone, replaced by a complex arrangement of stones and branches that Dr. Patel identified as a calendar marker, indicating the next full moon. They're setting a meeting time, he explained, barely containing his excitement. This is unprecedented. When the full moon came 2 weeks later, we returned as invited. What followed was the first documented peaceful contact between humans and Sasquatch in modern history. The creatures emerged from the forest not as terrifying beasts, but as a community, led by the silver-haired elder, who seemed to have appointed itself as ambassador to our species. Through a combination of gestures, vocalizations, and the rudimentary translation key in Dr. Nielsen's journal, we began the slow process of communication. We learned that they called themselves the Forest People, or a sound approximating that meaning, that they had been observing humans for generations, and that they were as curious about us as we were about them. Over subsequent meetings, a tentative trust developed. They allowed us to photograph them, to record their music, to document their social structures, always on their terms, always with the understanding that they could end contact at any moment. The footage and photographs I captured during those encounters were eventually released to the public, not as a sensational exposé, but as a carefully contextualized scientific announcement. The revelation of the Sasquatch's existence sent shockwaves through the scientific community and the public consciousness. But the controlled nature of the disclosure helped prevent the very exploitation and invasion Dr. Patel had feared. Protected status was immediately granted to the Sasquatch and their habitat. Parts of Olympic National Park were permanently closed to public access, becoming a sanctuary for these remarkable beings. Research continued under strict ethical guidelines, with Amber eventually taking over as lead scientist when Dr. Patel retired. As for me, my photographs and video documentation earned me accolades I'd never dreamed of, including a Pulitzer Prize and a permanent position with the National Geographic Society. But more meaningful than any award was the privilege of being among the first humans in modern history to document the true nature of these legendary creatures, not as monsters or myths, but as intelligent beings with whom we share this planet. Our terrifying encounter in the Hoh rainforest had begun with fear and nearly ended in tragedy. Instead, it opened the door to one of the most significant discoveries in human history, a reminder that even in our thoroughly explored world, there remain mysteries waiting to be understood, and that sometimes what we fear most is simply what we understand least. The footage that shocked the world wasn't just evidence of a Sasquatch attack. It was the beginning of an interspecies dialogue that continues to this day, rewriting our understanding of intelligence, evolution, and our place in the natural world.